think there's a sense of freedom and also a sense of radicality that comes from abstraction, that comes from acknowledging that there's a history of Black abstraction that always pushed against sort of the more consumable ways that predominantly white collectors, white audiences, or institutions engage with. And if someone has to work a little bit harder, and there's not a signifier, and there's not sort of an overt reference to the maker and the maker's hand, it doesn't take away from the richness and the experience and perhaps the metaphor and the depth in the work of refusal. I hope that the time and nuance and meditative nature that's distilled down in my work, that you can feel a little bit of that translate. Time, sound as a texture, and paint as a material would be sort of the trifecta of my kind of alchemy. So at the Philip Johnson Glass House, I was able to install a site-responsive sound piece called RPM, Revolutions Per Minute. I used the materials of the building itself as the prompt for the sound piece. The sculpture building on that compound was built in 1971. So I listened to a lot of recordings from 1971 and collaged together a lot of the radical voices and thought about the things that were happening historically outside of the gates. So bringing these two worlds together to think about what was happening inside and outside of privilege, outside of design, and how they actually connect to each other. To be a conduit in a way. So the way I process sound has evolved into thinking of sound as a texture and sound as another material that I can use in my toolbox to fill a space and to create an atmosphere and to sort of shift an energy, and how that connects to your experience of looking and seeing visual work. What a magical moment and an honor to have an exhibition at the Guggenheim in 2022. I was the first African-American woman to have a show in the Rotunda. Having a sound piece in tandem was really challenging, but also very rewarding to try to put the texture of sound into a space that has that kind of architecture and that kind of power. While you were experiencing my visual work, you could hear the sonic piece in the distance. So it became like a siren song as you traveled through those other levels to get to the top of the museum. And what's important to me too is to talk about sound bleed and how I can sort of participate in the other visual works that are in spaces by having a sound piece that's going to be in the room and share space with those other histories and those other artists. I think that site-responsive work has a lot more obligation and sensitivity towards the space. It's more about expansion. It's more about generosity. It's more about hopefully providing some kind of alternative way of seeing what women of color offer to the creative world and how it relates to a really complex, beautiful history of other forms of abstraction and other forms of radical thinking that come in African American culture.